Hello, everybody, and good approximately noon or whatever time of the day it is where you are from the Key Culture podcast. I am Niilo Tarnanen, and I'm co hosting this show with Matei Gheorghiu.
Hi, everybody.
Our guest today is Alexey Pegushev, a composer, pianist, and improviser from Latvia, also known as That Eastern European Guy, according to his YouTube channel. So before we go any further, Alexey, how did you come up with this name for your channel? Why exactly that Eastern European guy?
Why not that Latvian guy?
Oh, that's a really good point, and it has to do something with both my personal and my musical identity. When I was receiving my music education, I ended up traveling to a lot of countries. I studied in Finland, Norway, the UK, Lithuania, by the way, also. And then I noticed, as I was a foreigner in those many countries and met new people, I discovered an Eastern European identity in me, namely because I could easily get along with people from other Eastern European countries, even those countries I've never been to. For example, I've made quite a few Romanian friends recently, even though I've never been to Romania. But just the way they talk, I can quickly relate and understand what they're talking about. So there's this personal level to that. Another reason is musical. So definitely Eastern European music has been a great influence on me, and well, let's say the Eastern European minimalists such as Arvo Pärtta and Valentin Silvestrov, Peteris Vasks, the Lithuanian minimalists. All this has influenced my style, but also even the Latvian music tradition itself uh, has a lot of Eastern European music influence. For example, the whole Latvian Music Academy was founded by students of Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, with all the consequences from there. So this just accurately reflects where I'm come from.
Yeah, enlightening. So there's kind of double uh, double reference there, both musical and personal. Interesting. Okay, let's go forward and start with listening an improvised piano piece by you called One Octave, that is on your YouTube channel, That Eastern European Guy. Just say it very obviously. It is a channel where Alexey is improvising on various styles of various composers.
And he also has various challenges, like the one we're going to hear. It's a challenge made by from the comment section. So some people will say, do a piece that is like this, do a piece that. So this piece is like improvisation using only one octave, which is very impressive, as we're about to see.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah,
So nice.
that was great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I totally enjoyed the way how you took advantage of the very limited setting. Many counterpoint students would be envy of this.
Yes, and I was thinking like when I first heard this that you're going to use an octave, which I assumed like it's going to be from C to C or from from B to B, but you actually didn't even do that. You played just from C to B, like you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you used I guess 12 sounds in the end, 12 notes. And I was quite curious how you did this because this is an improvisation, but it seems like it's very well made. I mean, it has if I'm getting a bit technical now, it has an A section in E minor. Then you have a B section, which is in, I think, C major, if I'm not wrong. Then that goes back to the A section very little, but then it goes to the B section now in B flat. And then that modulates to, was it G or C? And so it's more complex the second time, and then the third time you have the A section again and some kind of coda. So that seems like a piece that it's well thought through. How do you go through this process?
So first of all, I started by just simply playing around, and when I received this challenge, I just wanted to double check whether it's possible at all. So I started just looking at some sounds, chords, textures, then quickly discovered that that if you put your hands like this, then you can get more out of it than if you just try squeeze in them together. Um, then I came up with the opening section, I'd say fairly quickly, and it probably sounds a little bit more refined because I actually had to practice the technical aspect a little bit just to hit the right notes. And once I came up with the first, let's say, 5 or 10 seconds, I just thought there would be an A section, a B section, and maybe something else in the end. So I try to think about the structure in advance very often in my improvisations, or I try to make them spontaneous, but memorize what I'm doing at one moment and try to reuse it later. So I think that this one had a mixture of two, that the very few first seconds I came up with, and they were quite refined, and then the B section. Actually, one of the reasons why the B section sounds different the first time when it comes and the second time when it comes, because I sort of try to memorize it while I play, and then obviously I can't recall it perfectly. So it has to sound a little bit different when it appears the second time.
Really? Because I thought the B section was even more refined than the A section. So you
Oh, okay.
you tricked me pretty well.
Yeah, I don't know that what you said about the memorizing, it really reminds me on one point David Moss made in a master course about improvisation, that actually improvisation is really much about being conscious of what you do and making kind of immediate, let's say, a trace of memory in your head of what are you doing, so that you can use it again. This makes really improvisation to work in an effective way and not be just some random mumble bumble. I think you're doing a really good job here. So to take the discussion back towards your channel, it's an interesting concept for a YouTube channel. So I'd like to ask, why did you start this channel, and what are you hoping to achieve with it?
So I had the thought of a YouTube channel for quite many years, for an embarrassing long time. Probably the first time I thought about it was like 8 or 9 years ago. Of course, that wasn't serious. That was just in principle. Oh, that would be nice, just in the say, oh, like it would be nice to have a Ferrari or whatever people think about it. So that wasn't really realistic at that time. But then it really, when I started finally doing that, it's not so much that I thought, oh, it would be nice to have a YouTube channel. What could I do for YouTube? It's mostly about, oh, I have these improvisations. And then what would be the best platform to convey this to the world? Because what happened, I did improvisation for quite a long time. Most of the time, I would do it either alone or in a small group of friends, and we would do something similar, like those subscriber challenges, but in real time with my friends. I don't know. A common one would be, let's say if a friend asked me to play Despacito, and then they suddenly ask me, okay, can you do it now in the style of Mozart? Can you do it now in the style of Beethoven and stuff like this? Just changing composers in real time. So it was more like a party activity at the start, and I thought it was quite a common thing to do, and then people started convincing me that maybe it's not that common, maybe it's like worth showing to somebody else. So I started feeling that these musical experiences, not so much that they go to waste, but there could be some value in sharing them with people I don't know personally. And YouTube happens to be the best platform to do this, in my opinion, because of this interaction with the viewers. So I get those subscriber challenges from a comment section. For example, this one octave video that we just discussed. I don't think I would have come up with this challenge on my own. I usually try to like come up with some limitations, or maybe improvise with only 3 notes, or like improvise using only one hand or something like this. But this particular thing, so it required community involvement. And then the final reason is I thought that a video format could be particularly interesting. So when I started making this YouTube channel, I decided that it's not just a platform to put music on, that I'm going to be specifically making YouTube videos. So I'm not quite exactly sure why the people that watch my channel. Maybe I should ask them about it. But I
Or why the
suspect that
people
some
doing
of
podcasts invite you to their shows.
that too. But I mean, I'm here and I'm happy about it. So you can't uninvite me anymore, I hope. Yeah, please air this episode.
Go on. Yeah, yeah.
So I was talking about. Oh yeah, so I think part of the reason is that maybe it feels to me that there are people who might gain some value or enjoyment out of not so much feeling and understanding the music, but just simply watching somebody's fingers move like 10 inquisitive animals and just following these movements in a meditation-y sort of way. At least this is how I watch some other pianist channels. So there's this visual aspect as well. And then the final straw, or the final reason, was quite obvious for everybody when lockdown came, and I had been having these half-baked ideas for some while. That was just the right time, because the alternative is Netflix, and this just seems to be
Yeah.
more worthwhile.
I think somewhat similar for us. I've also had an idea to make a show of, or a podcast for some years, but I was like, nah, I'm teaching, I'm composing, I'm doing doctoral, I'm doing this, and now it seemed like the right time to try something like this. So I completely understand.
I would like to ask one follow-up question when you mentioned that you like to watch pianists' hands. So I think the angle of your video is actually very nice to this, because you can really see the hands all the time. Actually, very many music videos, even in YouTube, that are made of pianists are kind of in the concert setting, that you are seeing them from kind of from a side. But if you look from up, from above, it gives you a very fine and, let's say, minimalistic screen in a sense, that you just see the keys and the fingers. And there's I think there is some point in what you said about the meditation aspect here. It brings you closer to perhaps the experience of the pianists themselves. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not pianist myself.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was indeed in part my intention, actually, because I've noticed that as a listener and as a performer, the musical experience that I most enjoy are in small rooms with a small number of people, where you can see the pianist's hands and face expressions close up, so there's nothing to hide. It's more personal. And even at large concerts, I'd usually take the front row seats so that I could get the pianist closer. And I never understood why the first 2 rows are always cheaper than the rest. Like they should be double the price, at least in most concert halls. And so I thought that this angle could be the closest to that experience.
Do you think it's more global phenomenon that the 2 first rows are empty? I mean, I've always thought that it's something that just happens in Finland, that nobody dares to go to the
No,
first row.
it's in Romania the same, unless it's
Okay,
full house. But if it's full house, I guess from
maybe
the third row it starts to be like legit. You know?
Maybe it's northern Eastern European thing. I don't know. Yeah, interesting.
I think it has to do with acoustics, because very often like you just hear better from when you're further. But I guess it depends from hall to hall.
I guess so too. Another thing that I'd like to ask a follow-up question was about that you thought first that imitating certain styles would be a common thing. I'd like to ask, like, was it really a common thing in, let's say, among the friends that you had in Latvia or in some other country that you have lived, or did you just think it and it never was actually?
It is definitely the latter, though. Like, I just it's very often when you do something, you just assume that like maybe everybody else does it. Yeah, so it's definitely the latter.
I wanted to also ask something about the channel, because I've listened to quite a few of your videos, and do you have some like stylistic preferences? Because you don't go like, you don't do, let's say, everything. Like you seem to like certain things, and I don't want to say what those things are, but maybe you can say something about that.
That's a great point, actually, because I found that one of the main challenges in not only improvisation, but also doing anything art related these days, when everything is permitted, is to choose what to do, what is worth doing. And this is already like half the creative process. So actually, I haven't been uploading everything that I do. There are certain styles that I still keep, in a small friend circle, just for on personal enjoyment. Maybe I'll start uploading more of those. See, so just naturally, certain stylistic preferences occur. So one style that I do quite a lot is some hyper romantic improvisations, so very 19th century influenced, with the hope that all these influences from Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Scriabin blend in together and in their exaggerated manner create possibly something new and personal. So that's one. Another one that I do quite a bit is a certain form of minimalism, and but it doesn't sound the way people would think when they hear the word minimalism. Minimalism in the sense that it's very rhythmical, uses repetition, some limited material. There's a process. Let's say you start with like 6 notes, and then it becomes 7 notes and 8 notes, and then you change it and so on. I've been doing quite a bit, and there's both an artistic reason and technical reason for that, which, if you're interested, we can discuss further. And a third style would be more contemporary, which I want to say contemporary, quote unquote, let's say stereotypically contemporary, in the sense that it's a little bit more dissonant, more complex, and I just try to see, what are the limits of being dissonant, so that it's interesting enough, but it's not too complex, so that it actually has an emotional impact and can be enjoyable both on an intellectual and on a spiritual level, perhaps. And finally, there is, I'm not sure how to describe that. I'd call it something as semi-impressionism, I guess. I've had a few improvisations like this, and the idea is that it has a lot of different consonant harmonies, but just more of those. So it's something that's purposely very colorful, maybe even a little bit too colorful at the start. So something like this, at least these four, maybe there's going to be more. As a means to relax myself, I made a video where I improvise in a pop music style, which is just four chords, like proper chorus, verses, and everything. But I wouldn't do that every day. So
Yeah,
what was that four? Was that 4.5? Let's say for now.
yeah, I was gonna say
Wow.
almost exactly what you said. Like I was gonna say that you have a Mahler kind of style, uh, Debussy-ish kind of style, an Arvo Pärt-ish kind of style. Then I wasn't sure if I would combine the Arvo Pärt-ish kind of style with the other minimalistic challenges, like the one we just heard, which is like play with one finger or play with three fingers or play one octave or play only going up, or what other challenges you have that in the end up being pretty minimalistic because the restriction is so huge. And then you would have some some more dissonant, more dissonant but still like somewhat romantic style. So those would have been my picks.
So it's actually quite a big variety of not only the material but of various styles. Let's say, anyhow, it's kind of focused on what's been going on in the art music in latest 2 centuries, like approximately. Before we go, maybe to ask a bit more about the improvisation per se, I would like to ask a bit more about the technical process behind making the videos. I think it's an interesting question too to ask. So what kind of mic do you use? What kind of video camera do you use? And kind of how much do you need time for setting this all stuff up? Or is it just like click and
How many hundreds of hours for one video?
Hey, great question. I love talking about this stuff, including all the practicals. So first of all, at the start, it takes a lot of time. Then you become a little bit more efficient as you do the setup. Before publishing my first video, I probably spent 3 months of quite intensive work just trying to figure out like which mic to buy, how do you find this camera angle, which is not trivial. Turns out in order to film your hands from above, you need that tripod over here, which has an extended horizontal arm, so it goes up and a little bit forward, so that you can actually have the full view of the keys. Yeah, so I use this mic. It's a Rhodes N1, and I mainly use it to record voice. I have a digital piano right over here. Yeah, which you can probably hear now. And when I record music, I usually connect it directly to the computer. But in addition to that, sometimes what I do, I also turn on the mic and put it on low level and record the actual natural piano sound as well. And so if I put it low level, it has a little bit of noise, but it gives a hint of naturalness. And at least I hope that it makes the digital piano sound a little bit more like real piano. So there are these two things. Then what else? For the video aspect, that was the most complicated. So the main challenge was to find the camera angle, and that's the tripod. Then there's a lot of lights, like a lot of lights. You probably can see one umbrella behind me, but there's 4 of those. But the good thing what that allows to do is, with a lot of lights, you don't really need an expensive camera or anything. So all the videos that are on my channel are shot with a $100 phone.
Wow.
Yeah.
I should probably get some umbrellas for this light right there, but maybe some other time.
Yeah,
I'm
should
happy
get more
to
lights
recommend
here.
actual options. Yeah, and I assume some of your viewers will be interested in the more practical, like the material side of this, because I know I'm a very nosy person. I like to know how much things cost. So the total of everything I mentioned, I think, was something between 500 and 600 euros. So it's some money, but it's not a lot. Like it's actually doable. You know, you can just save up it in a couple of months, I guess, if you live in a developed country. Yeah.
How about the time? Like, does it take you long to edit these videos?
Oh yeah, I forgot to answer the most important part. Thanks. So once the setup is done, depending on the video, it can take anywhere. The whole process can take anywhere from 1 hour on a good day to 2 months on and off, like multiple days. So for example, if a video is like really improvised, completely in one take, and sometimes I do those, sometimes, as we discussed with the 1 octave video, there is some pre-planning involved, or maybe there's multiple takes where I just don't hit the right notes. But for some videos that are one take, well, recording it takes the duration of the piece, let's say 5 or 10 minutes. Then the audio editing parts could take me up to half an hour, depending on how refined I want it to be. Usually there's quite a lot of post-production involved, because the digital piano sound is quite ugly. Then you have to adjust the EQ, add some reverb. And what I later started doing is creating some spatial effects. So what I like to do is just copy the same track 5 times and then put different reverbs and different EQs to all of them, and pan them to different parts of the headphones so that you get a little bit of a room effect. And this can take some calibrating. So if I'm not too distracted, this could take up to half an hour. For long video, it's much more than that. For example, I've made a couple of videos which include multi-tracks, and those were quite painful, because then you also have to calibrate the levels, and I'm a little bit new to this technical stuff, so those could take up to 4 hours maybe.
But I mean, you know, I ask because I know that you upload also quite frequently. We upload once a week, maybe, our channel. And I mean, it takes me probably, in the best possible case, anything with the video editing and doing the actual show and then uploading and so on. In the best possible case, this podcast takes 5-6 hours per week for me. So for you, it probably takes longer, everything, no? I mean, it's not a full-time job, but it seems like it's a consistent part of what you do every day, right?
Absolutely. So definitely, I didn't count the hours, although I guess I should to be more organized. But it's definitely takes a number of hours per week that's compared to a full-time job. That's comparable to a full-time job. The video editing, yeah.
So you would say that you spend more than 20 hours per week with your channel?
Well, not the last 2 weeks, because I'm involved in something else that.
Sure, but on average.
On average, yeah, I'd say more than 20 hours. At least I try to. So there are ways to be efficient about it. For example, very often when I know what to do, I record the improvisations in bulk, because the setup for recording takes some 10-15 minutes for meta work and then cleaning up after that. So I might record, let's say, 5 improvisations per day. Well, per day of shooting. I don't shoot every day, actually. Then I edit the audio on a separate day, and then I edit all the videos in a separate day. The video editing process at the beginning was quite painful. Now, if it's just one music video with no extra text or anything, then it could probably take me sometimes even sometimes even less than that, sometimes even as little as 20 minutes, because I now know I have a certain standard model what I can do with those. If these are more pre-planned videos, as I do some non-improvisation videos on my channel. For example, I made a couple of videos where I talk about music. Those were extremely long to make in every aspect. For example, there's a video called Classical Masterpieces Made Happier.
Yes,
and
I was thinking about that one.
Yeah, so this one, it took 9 hours just of pure shooting.
I can guess.
Yeah, before that, it took a couple of weeks of occasional technical practicing just to try and get the right notes, and then to plan all the pieces and just simply to come up with it. Then the editing parts, the editing part was definitely 1.5 days nonstop. Maybe I should be more efficient about this, but just the audios, putting everything together, adjusting the levels, yeah, stuff like this, making photos, cutting them. So there are these many small things that watching a YouTube videos, they don't look like a big deal, but it actually takes time. Even just to put one photo in a video, you've got to find it, then you got to edit it so that it looks nice, then you got to do some arithmetics and calculate, oh, what's the right number of pixels, and then adjust it accordingly. So it really takes time, but I hope to get more efficient in the future.
Practice makes master.
Right.
But I think, yeah, it really sounds like you are kind of full-time YouTube improviser pretty much now these days. Wow, that's impressive in a way. So maybe let's talk a bit more of the improvisation per se. And I think there was two things you mentioned that kind of want me to put bridges between things. One is actually with the piano. I mean, obviously you're a pianist, so how does that affect your improvisation or your musical thinking? So, I mean, do you think that you would improvise differently if you were a player of a different instrument? Or do you think differently as a improviser when you have only your own instrument compared to as composer when you have an opportunity to use other instruments too?
I absolutely think differently, and piano has influenced my not just improvisation thinking, but composer thinking really deeply. And I haven't decided if that's a good or a bad thing, like whether
Same
it's
here.
limited
Exactly same like you.
exactly, yeah, or whether it gives you a certain personality or something like this. I guess the number one thing that I would say, the way I perceive music, even when I listen to music, even when it's orchestral music that doesn't have piano, if I hear a chord, I can immediately start almost feeling something at the tip of my fingers. Like I have a tactile perception of music, so I can imagine what we would feel in my hands to play it. And then there's another aspect of what often pianist composers struggle with or have to grapple with is, so do you compose something that's easy to play? Because it's easy to, if you improvise something, and if it's easy to do, if it's comfortable in your hand, then you're just more likely to do it. But then does that mean that the material is somehow subpar to what you could have come up with your own brain? That's a little bit harder to play, which you would have to practice. That would possibly be a little bit more interesting. So I had to solve this problem. But there are upsides to this. For example, I think because of the specific nature of my hand, for example, I like probably these two fingers are in my left hand are a little bit stretchier than these three fingers. And as a result, I can sometimes take chords that have neighboring notes or close notes over here. So let's say if you can imagine a chord like E, G, E, G, but in two different octaves. And if you take that with both hands, then it actually can sound quite nice. It gives you this sense of, so it's because it's a minor third, but 4 times, it gives you this minory feel. But at the same time, because it's lacking a G, it's lacking a B, it's lacking the fifth note for a triad, it has this sense of emptiness to it, and it creates this mixed emotional feeling. So I've started using these chords even in non-piano music. I've had a string orchestra piece recently where I used those chords a lot. And I don't think I would have come up with that without actually physically trying to touch this. Oh, but there's one more thing. Sorry, I'm just starting to ramble, but I want to mention
Go
something
ahead,
else.
go ahead.
You mentioned other instruments. And unfortunately, as a pianist, so I'm a little bit limited in the sense like I don't play any other instrument, although I do play the organ somewhat. I've had a few classes. I even had a recital in which I got the chance to combine organ improvisations with Katy Perry songs played on the organ, which with the instruments perfectly suits the mood. So at least I got like exposed to this color-based thinking where you adjust the registers and so on. And this could have transferred into the way I think about form in improvisation. For example, sometimes what I try to do is I imagine different orchestra instruments or different organ registers in my mind, and how this transfers to piano is that there's a slightly different touch. There's a slight differences in articulation. I don't know if they're audible to the listener, but at least they help me decide how different sections of an improvised piece, or even sometimes a non-improvised piece, are going to relate to each other. But in addition to actual instruments, there's one more thing that I've tried. Is I have a friend who is quite a creative person, and they used to be an aspiring poet, and they're like a really good one. Now I think they're doing something silly like a PhD in cognitive science, but you know, when
I
they
wouldn't
used
call
to
that silly personally, but
yeah, I know, and they're quite smart in many ways and creative in many ways. So we sometimes used to challenge each other. We would just find a random everyday object, let's say like a paper cup or mug, and then we would give each other 15 minutes, and I would have to improvise a piece on it, and he would have to compose a poem about it, and
oh,
then
yeah.
sometimes would switch. And those experiences I found quite illuminating in the sense that they force you to think about music in those general ways, like, you know, what could you convey with, like, is there an emotion that you could convey with absolutely every instrument, even if it's just a paper plate or something like this. So
So it's
yeah,
thinking
that's
outside the box in the end.
pretty much thinking outside the box and just looking at all the boxes and see what all the boxes have in common.
You've already touched this in the previous statement, but I'd like to ask, since you already went there, like since you're a composer, like composer, like the one who writes scores and has like live musicians playing them. I know you have a deadline for a string quartet now, you told me so. So how does the composer Alexey Pegushev influence the improviser Alexey Pegushev, and vice versa?
That's really interesting, actually, because I don't want to say that I try to keep them completely separate, but at least conceptually, obviously, they influence one another. But the actual music itself, I'm not sure if you could tell that this is the same person. For example, all these styles that I mentioned in improvisation before, like the minimalism, the quasi-minimalism, the romantic stuff, especially the romantic stuff, even though it's my favorite to improvise, I would probably never allow myself something like that in a serious composition for an actual concert. So even though improvisation is basically quick composition, that's one definition of it, I'm a very slow composer when I write music deliberately. Usually there's a long stage of just thinking and not writing anything that can last for months. And then this results in me barely meeting my deadlines, and conductors taking Xanax and writing angry emails for which I'm very sorry about, but I just can't do anything. And the reason for that, when I compose, I'm much stricter about the reasons why I compose and why I choose certain notes over another, because there's just so much stuff that I want to make sure that what I do is at least on some level is worth doing. For example, one requirement that I set for myself is that each piece I compose, each notated piece I compose, has to have at least one small new thing about it. Well, to the extent that anything can be called new. So there's that. That's why my style is completely different. For example, I would
because I was thinking that, you know, as an improviser, you have to take decisions like this very fast, and you just go with what you know. I guess your mannerisms are also developed, so they influence you, and you just have to go. But the results you do get in your pieces are pretty substantial. Like it doesn't feel like some guy playing around. I mean, it sounds like serious pieces anyway. So then I was wondering, how does that not trick you into also being fast when you write music? Because you seem to be very effective in what you're doing in improvisation. Then why couldn't you be as effective in composing? But I completely understand what you said, that it's very hard to just accept that a decision that was made fast is also the best one.
That's true, and actually, that's very often the case. That when I compose something and I decide quickly, okay, I'll just fill this section in here, and I'm gonna change it later, and then later I just don't. Um, well, there is some further interaction in the sense there's, I think, what is much more common, what used to be common, I think it's still fairly common these days, is to use improvisation as a composition method. Is to, when you come up with material, you sort of just brute force it. You just play whatever. And when, oh, okay, this is a nice chord. I got to write this down. And then so you just now you play for another 2 hours. Okay, this is something that's came by accident, but it's pretty nice. And so you get this. There's that interaction.
Yeah,
And
that's something I can totally relate to. I mean that sometimes the improvisation is really healthy to you, and at least to my slowness, in a way that if I improvise, I might find some results that are actually really enjoyable and interesting, in a sense that I haven't thought them before, and then I can use them in the short, let's say, in the long and tedious work of more analytic composing. So it was interesting to say that in your case they are more split, whereas I would perhaps say that in my personality they are quite together, even if the results every now and then could be quite diverse. But interesting. Yeah, you mentioned the kind of clickbait words, serious composition. So this made me to think like, but isn't improvisation ever serious? I mean, like, could it be taken seriously? This brings in mind its position in contemporary music, and also in kind of how we perceive improvisation as part of the long tradition of classical music. So maybe we talk a bit later about the kind of historical side, but kind of, why do you think it is this way that we need to specifically talk about serious composing and non-serious improvisation? Or do we need? What do you think?
oh, the thing is, I think we don't. I still say the word serious just because that's what I'm used to, even though that's not really, that's quite the opposite of what I believe. I do take improvisation seriously, and I definitely sort of, if I manage to make any valuable contribution to music at all, that would be it. It's just getting improvisation to a more serious place in the music scene that it is right now. But I think it's very often happens that the way things are created can influence the perception of these things. So there's an interesting aspect. As a pianist, I sometimes, well, I used to pre-COVID get gigs, and because I don't want to, practice too many new pieces, I always include improvisation in my sets. And I've noticed that I've got better reactions if I just don't tell the people that this was improvised. For example, I play a piece and they say, "Oh, like that was nice," and then what was that? Can you play it again? And I say, like, of course I can't play it again. That was just improvisation. I just made this up, and they were, "Oh, really interesting," as opposed to if I mention, "Oh, now I'm going to improvise something," then they're not going to necessarily always stick around and just listen it until the end.
I remember.
But I think the main thing that I have to say,
sorry, I wanted to say a similar experience. I went to a jazz concert once where the saxophonist and guitarist played like, I don't know, 8 pieces. They all had names and they were in the program. Then in the end, they gave some kind of encore. And that was the best piece of the whole concert. And I was like, oh yes, this, I want to buy the record. And I was like, no, that was an improvisation. We don't know what we did. Like it was, I was like, what do you mean you don't know it? Like I wanted to hear that again. And I was disappointed that I can't.
I have once read about a research made on how people react to, on the other hand, improvised, and on the one hand, written music in a performance. And actually, it was found out that people are more kind of active and they are more attentive to the music when they know that it's improvisation. And it's interesting. Interesting. I mean, it's both in line with what Matei just said, but it's also in contrast to what you told about that if people would in previous know that it's improvisation, they might be like, I don't know. So I don't know, maybe there's two sides in it.
It is actually counterintuitive, so I'm quite surprised with this conclusion, and I'm happy to hear this conclusion, that improvisation is taken seriously, because very often, as when improvisation is not taken seriously, my answer would be just because it's done efficiently doesn't mean it isn't done with care.
And let's say to the audience this, because I think this is a huge misconception that improvisers just like are improvising everything. I mean, you have to be you have to know what you're doing. Like this is also craft that you develop. It's not something that you can just do and go. Like you're painting a wall with colors, I mean, it takes some practice also.
Of course, because if you are to sing about something or play something, you have to have a really good technique with which you do it, and you have to be very quick in your mind to kind of make the decisions and not to be too conscious about what you make, because otherwise you're too late. And on the other hand, you need to be conscious in order to in order to repeat it or alter it or just stop it and do something completely different, depending what the others are doing or what you are doing, or depending on the situation. So it's true. I don't remember who, but some of important old people once said that whatever you improvise is what you know the best. And I think it's the truth. If you try to improvise stuff that is kind of new to you, and or try to pretend that you know something that you haven't ever done, it will pretty soon end up being something really superficial and shit in improvisation. Yeah, maybe that's my kind of echo here. Just to tell, like, both of us hosts, Matei and me, we have improvised in, for example, in Korvatauki Ensemble some years ago, which was kind of band had always a bit different lineup on each gig, and we practiced. We made rehearsals for using some concepts or then some technical aspects of, for example, communication between the musicians, but that kind of gave us some, let's say, insight on this matter, and also what is the reaction of the audience, but also what is the reaction of, let's say, the field in more general. At least those days, let's say 5 years ago approximately, improvisation was more of an underground activity in the context of contemporary art music. But I don't know, has it come better? I mean, have there been any change? What do you think, Alexey? What's your experience? Is it taken more seriously now than what it was taken a couple of years ago?
So for somebody who does improvisation for such a considerable amount of time, I'm not even sure I'm the best person to know about the contemporary music scene. contemporary music improvisation scene, but I've seen a few bits and pieces in the countries I've visited, and I've noticed one common theme is wherever I attended an improvisation masterclass or I participated in an improvisation concert, especially a group concert, there was very often advertised and presented as something that instrumentalists do. So it's a chance for an instrumentalist to get creative and composery, as opposed to a chance for a composer to get instrumentally. I don't know. So for me personally, the fundamental aspect, that I'd say improvisation is a type of composition, while those improvisation attempts I attended and I hear about, it's mostly a type of playing, which is perfectly fine as a type of music. I just wish there was more of that other part where the composition comes first.
I think this is really, really interesting, because for me, improvisation, the essence of the improvisation is that you are both the composer and the performer on the same moment. And I think this is kind of a natural state of matters that is somehow just lost very often in today's music world, where people are really, really specialized in doing just some small segment of musicianship very, very well, and just kind of abandoning all the other stuff to have kind of enough time to become specialized. But I think if we think where the music kind of naturally lives and develops on, it develops when the performance and the creative aspects of music are kind of, together, living together and just finding their way towards the future. Matei, you had a point to make.
Yes, I had several points. I could say that I could have been anytime one of these old people who say that composing is this serious activity that you do it proper way. You go to school, you learn the techniques, you write it down, and then when we started improvising in the Korvatauki ensemble, then I realized that, hey, I don't actually know what I'm doing. I have to up my game a bit. And the more we improvise together, the more I realized that, hey, this is quite nice and this is quite serious stuff we're doing. And there's many people who don't see this as any kind of serious part of contemporary music. And now let's say I'm a bigger defender of the improvisation scene, simply because I've done it, but I know that many people don't do it. And it is seen kind of as not somehow fitting in. And if I'm thinking of the classical tradition, as opposed to jazz or pop music or folk music, where improvisation has always been part of jazz is pretty much improvisation in the end. A huge part of jazz is just improvising. But classical music is always associated with the written music. Classical music is that serious written music. And we also tend to forget that in Baroque we had like figured bass, which was just improvisation in the end. And then we had like singers improvising their melismas in arias throughout history until, let's say, in Wagner you don't do that, but I guess in something like Rossini, you still do a lot of that. Singers were still doing that. And then you have more new music, something like Lutoslavsky even. Like you can have this like passages where there's some amount of freedom within what you're playing. Maybe it's not exactly improvising, but it's some kind of chance that you're taking within the given frame. And if you think about it, improvisation has always been part of classical music. We just don't think about it much.
So you did mention a few interesting points, and I think they have something in common. So you said jazz, you said figured bass, and you said the melismas in operas, which are three different styles, three different eras, but they have something in common. It's one particular type of improvisation, which I found it always puzzling that it has become the prototypical type for improvisation. I like to call it variational improvisation. When you have a structure in mind, whether it's a figured bass or jazz chord progression, or a certain form or a certain structure, and then you fill it in. This improvisation is quite nice, but then half of the piece is already ready. It's like if you improvise over if you're a pianist and if you play a chord progression that takes the left hand, and so you're left with only the right hand. This means that like half of the work is already done, and very often it's something that already conveys the mood of the piece. And already has the essentials. So, but for me, the most interesting tradition that has been a little bit forgotten, like is this 19th century romantic approach. You have Chopin, Liszt just coming up with all this spontaneous stuff and then maybe writing down some of it, which they probably refined to structure a little bit more. You have the fantaisie, impromptu, and all these kind of
true.
unforeseen things. What I would like to see more, and what would be super interesting for me, is that we can take that approach, combine this with other approaches, and then apply this to other styles. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be 19th century romantic music, but I would be very interested to hear how something like that would sound with jazz. Let's say you start with one chord progression and then something else completely different happens. You have a whole different section, and then you maybe even modulate from one style to another. Like, you start in jazz and you end up in Baroque or whatever, and then you go back. Something like that actually exists, but maybe it's a much, much smaller proportion than this structured variational improvisation.
Or maybe it's also that nowadays, if improvisation is kind of used in the process of some piece becoming existent, I think nowadays it's quite often that the improvisation part of the process is hidden. You just do it on your own, and then, oh, now I found it, and then kind of, okay, this is the piece. I think, even, I might be wrong, but I think that even in pop music that Matei was referencing, it goes maybe more this way nowadays. So the stuff that is on records or that happens on the gigs, I think there's not much improvisation ever in there, but it's really produced. So if improvisation happens, so it happens in the camps when you're just doing the pieces. And I think this is quite near, perhaps, to what we contemporary art music composers are kind of mostly doing. So we don't that often do the improvised version, to put it very kind of simple way, in a public event. So I think this would, from what you just said, Alexey, I think it would be really interesting to kind of have a series of concerts where you always kind of make one piece anew as an improvisation. Then in the next concert, you make a written out version of the same piece. And kind of this way, that maybe this would also make the audience interested to come again and again to the same series, so they would hear many different versions of the same piece in this way, in this kind of Lisztian and Chopinesque impromptu manner. I don't actually know if this is really near to the history, but it would be interesting.
Why didn't I ever think of that? It's like an interesting concept. But I wanted to say a small thing about what Alexey said with regards to the styles and the jazz, and that it doesn't have to be only in that way. I myself don't listen much to jazz, but I've noticed one of my problems, maybe with jazz, but maybe with improvised music as a whole, it could be that very often you can very easily fall into the same kind of structures and the same kind of things you are used to. So if I go to a jazz concert where there's a, let's say, saxophone and a piano and a contrabass and a drummer, I know that the piece is going to start with the melody in the saxophone, and then they're going to start improvising on it, and then they're going to get crazier and crazier, and then it's going to get to a climax, and then there's going to be one solo, and then it's going to be an ending with the beginning. And throughout this piece, there's going to be solos of all the four people. And then you're like, okay, hear this in one piece, in the second piece, in the third piece, in the fourth. And of course, I'm not saying that it's always like this, but there is this sense that you can start thinking at some point, okay, these improvisers very often know to do this 1, 2, 3 things, and then they do them with different harmonies or different pieces.
I think there's some truth in what you say, Matei, but I would also say that much of, in a sense, similar cliches happen in written out music too. I mean,
Yeah, I
if you're
mean, we have sonata form, and it's every first
well,
move.
that's true, but also if you're going to orchestral premiere of a new work, so maybe after 1/2 of a minute, you will kind of, okay, this is this kind of piece. It will have approximately this kind of things happening there. Maybe in a bit different order, maybe orchestrated in a bit different way than in the other similar pieces. But okay, the piece will generally be about that. You don't that often really hear surprises in, in this way of how the piece is structured. Or maybe I'm just listening to small selection of too boring music. But
What do you think, Alexey, about what I said and what Niilo said with regards to the
Yeah,
structure of improvisation and symphonies and so on?
I was feeling quite similar way when listening to some improvisations. So first of all, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. Like maybe if it has a predictable structure, but the material is just so good that you don't care. Okay, like I know that a saxophone solo is coming up, but the saxophone is just so good that like I don't have to be surprised in order to enjoy it. Which is fine, but still, this raises the question: or maybe sometimes you won't be surprised. Maybe sometimes the emotion or the intellectual component or whatever you're trying to convey with the music just requires a different form. And this leaves me wondering, like, why do more different forms not happen in what we traditionally perceive as improvised music? When it comes to orchestral music or written down music, there are indeed a lot of cliches, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. But it just seems to me that there are more different kinds of cliches, and then sometimes you can be slightly more original than average by combining two or three different cliches that haven't been combined before. Let's say if you're composing in a sonata form, what usually the 19th century guys did is that, Beethoven now modulates instead of the dominant to the submediant or something,
Yeah.
and then a musicologist writes a whole book about that one passage of 4 bars. So yeah, I see the similarities. There's just more different stuff in written music, possibly because the composers have just more time to think about it, maybe, or maybe they are doing this for different purposes. Because as we mentioned before, the fact that an improvisation is still very often perceived as, first of all, what instrumentalists do rather than what composers do. Sometimes a classical form or a traditional form is a good way to show off your technical skills, because there's always this showmanship moment of, oh, here's my like flights of the bumblebee, see how fast I can move my fingers. And maybe having a more traditional form is just is just not too distracting. Let's say if it's also would be compositionally like something super interesting, then okay, like what do I admire? So are we here for the fast fingers, or are we here like for some deeply creative music?
I
So
think,
this could be a partial explanation.
I think there's some deep point in what you say, because people cannot pay their attention to do too many things at the same time. So if you are just relying on some cliche in one sense, so that kind of leaves the opportunity to you do simultaneously something that is more fresh or more, let's say, not expected, so that the listener can actually notice it. So it's true that you can't just say that something is good or bad because it uses these cliches. It's about the way you use them. Totally. Maybe we are soon about to wrap up the conversation. So I would like to ask first of you, Alexey. You've lived and worked in Latvia, Norway, Finland, UK,
And
some
Lithuania, you
else.
said. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so how have these countries shaped you as a composer and improviser? Has it been different in these countries? I mean, the atmosphere or the general influences, or what is considered high and what is considered low, and so on.
So I have two different answers for my composer self and for my improviser self. For my composer self, definitely having these different cultural experiences was absolutely indispensable. And so I think what I'm quite lucky to have is to have this Eastern European, almost post-Soviet, heavily Russian influence, like traditional bachelor's degree in composition. I know, like we had harmony, we had counterpoint. Um, we didn't have, well, we had a couple of quite strict teachers, and all this stuff. And then the Scandinavian parts was then on top of this traditional stuff. There was some freedom, and Norway, for example, the education there and the classes there were just so informal that almost gave me a cultural shock. You know, like the professors wear flip-flops and have piercings and, like, you know, drink beer in class and then do just whatnot. Um, but this also results in some you know, things that are musically interesting. So I'd say most things that I learned about improvisation in as part of my formal training. First of all, it's really not a lot. I took improvisation classes wherever I could because I was already interested in that. I started improvising way long before I started my formal music education. But whenever I took those improvisation classes, probably it's the ones in Finland and Norway that had the most creative, eye-opening experiences. So they were less focused on the technical stuff and more like on how you think about improvisation and how you interact with other people if you think with a group, if you improvise in a group. Whereas the technical stuff, everything that's technical, you know, how to combine different chords, or like how to think, like which scales to use, how do you do this, how do you build a form. That's basically everything. Never had a class about that. That's all just comes from learning by myself, from trial and error, partially from composing, partially from playing pieces, but mostly just improvising by myself, to the dismay of my surprisingly tolerant neighbors in the apartment block I lived in back in Latvia. Just simply improvising 10,000 of times, and you know, remembering some of that stuff and reapplying it later, reusing, transforming. So stuff like that.
Yeah, I would like to ask, who were the teachers in Norway and Finland that you referred that were the most kind of where we get the most of the improvisation stuff?
All right. So actually, I'm happy to list all my teachers because, like, surprisingly, it's really not that many. So first of all, I ever took an improvisation class that was with the Latvian jazz pianist Raimons Petrauskis. So, and that was very much performance focused rather than composition focused. So we talked about, you know, the different ways how you can touch the piano, and let's say how if you think about different non-musical objects while you touch the piano, you can change the sound. So let's say we had a task. Okay, now you have to touch the piano and like play a touch that's like a glacier, or now play it like it's fire, or now play it like it's, you know, something else. So all this stuff. So it's mostly was like finger related. Then I did an exchange in Norway, and there my main improvisation teacher was the absolutely brilliant saxophonist and improviser Rolf Erik Nyström. And there, so it was a lot of group improvisation, still mostly instrumentalist focused, but we did talk about the creative aspect. And there we did a lot of interactive challenges with the audience. Not so much just challenges, but I'd say other type of interactive activities. For example, one that I remember one of our students came up with, a piece of music is the group of musicians comes on stage, and then the audience doesn't know what's going to happen. But the rules are, if as soon as somebody in the audience member makes eye contact with you, you start playing a note. And depending on the color of the eyes of the audience member, like you play either a short note or a fast note or something like this. So there are these arbitrary conditions. And the audience maybe doesn't figure out what's happening, but it creates some restrictions and creates this fun music making process. And then maybe the musicians start looking at each other's eyes and getting those clues from each other's eyes. So we did a lot of creative stuff like this. And then I also tried, as a result, to do creative stuff like that by myself in my own practice room. So a standard one that I would do either by myself or with my friend is, let's say you have a photo and you just improvise over it. You know, how does a photo look like? Or you have a poem and you just read a poem and improvise over the feel of this poem. So there was that. Then came Finland, and there I had only a few improvisation classes because I was actively fishing for them. And even those that were offered, I think they weren't really advertised much. They weren't worth a lot of credit points, but they were utterly awesome. They were happening in Järvenpää, so they involved sauna and like weekend stays. Also quite informal, and there we did more of those creative challenges like improvising over a picture and stuff like this. But one interesting aspect was we talked about body awareness, like how you can improvise with proprioception. For example, one thing that you can do, like depending on what you do before, say it can influence your mood. You know, so let's say if you just smile before, or if you nod before, it just creates a different mood in your playing. One trick that I particularly liked was this: if you stand for like 2 minutes like a gorilla, just like that, then I don't remember which exactly hormone was that and what the exact neuro changes to neurochemistry that created, but then supposedly after that you are more confident, and if you want to play something quite loud with a lot of chords and like very, you know, then this would be the right warm up for this.
So everybody, kids, listen up. Whenever you have a stressful performance, you should just sit like a gorilla for a few minutes. Then you're gonna play like a monster.
Absolutely.
So who was the educator in this workshop?
That's extremely embarrassing. I'm gonna have to think about it.
Okay, maybe we can add it to the subtitles.
Yeah, we can add it to the subtitles.
Yeah, that would be really nice if we just could. But I could also double check that. And then after that, I had an exchange in Lithuania where I deliberately took a jazz improvisation class just to know what jazz is like, because I'm really not from a jazz background. Like I don't feel it, and even when I improvise, I more approach it like a classical musician, trying to mimic what that is. And at first I did, even though I'd say I can do a pretty convincing imitation of jazz. My teacher almost face-palmed at my first improvisation. And then what we ended up learning in those 8 classes that we had over that term is a few chord progressions, some basic jazz theory, but it was very much focused on theory and structure and rhythm. And I was just surprised how conservative such a liberal sounding, you know, this free feel genre of jazz is, because you can literally like make a mistake and play wrong notes on your second chord. Like, okay, you know, you play another chord, then this is not jazz anymore. This is just so yeah. And my teacher there was the Lithuanian jazz pianist Artūras Anasauskas. And then I moved to the UK. When I moved to the UK, that wasn't for music purposes, actually. I went there to study linguistics, although I did some music-related activities. And most improvisation was actually with my mathematician friend, Matteo Parisi, who also happens to play piano quite a lot and has like a very improvisation mindset. And what I learned there is communication, how to really improvise in a group. So we would mostly improvise for hands, and we would just try to give each other clues of like where all this stuff is going. We had some communication studies before in Norway and Finland, but the difference was because those improvisations were like so free and so contemporary in their chords and in their harmonic language, that communication about certain aspects, as let's say which notes you play, which I would say is quite important for music, wasn't really much delved into. But this time I think we managed to find ways how you can anticipate which chords exactly the other person will be playing to try and guide the piece somewhere. And there's very interesting dynamic. Okay, like who's going to take the lead, is who is going to be guided, and do you agree with the direction where the piece is moving, and so on. So I'm extremely fortunate to have all these 5 different perspectives, and I hope I can digest them and create something new as a result. Let's see.
Yeah, that sounds terrific. I mean, I could talk ages about the communicational aspect and the aspect of who's gonna lead, who's gonna agree, who's gonna disagree, and this. Unfortunately, our time is going to run up soon. So in the end, short question, short answer. Matei asks Alexey answers.
Yes. So, Alexey, what are the realistic chances for an improviser to earn a living in the new music scene, or in general?
I'm not sure how I'm going to come up with a short answer for that, but I'll do my best. First of all, I'd say for an improviser, just as any pianist, or no, any musician really, any classical musician especially, it was never easy given the COVID times. Probably going to be more difficult even now, but it probably ain't as grim as it might seem if you're smart about it. So I only started considering improvisation as a legitimate part of my career quite recently, with the launch of my YouTube channel with a few months ago. And hopefully I will give you a better and more satisfying answer in 10 years.
Let's say, are you hoping to earn some living with your YouTube channel, let's say?
Eventually, I'd say. So it could take a lot of work, but the main mindset that I have right now is, okay, I'm doing these improvisations. I try to select them carefully. I make sure that I have something to say. I just don't upload anything. And there are people whom I don't know personally who seem to enjoy it in one way or another, who seem to get some value out of this. So it could be possible that more people exist who could enjoy or get value from this type of content. So I'm just going to keep doing it and get back to you in 5 or 10 years down the road and tell you if it's easy to earn a living as an improviser or not.
All right.
Well, maybe we will make a reshoot then. But hey, thanks really, Alexey. This was a really, really good afternoon, or let's say early afternoon with you, also known as That Eastern European Guy. So please go and check Alexey's
YouTube. You can find it from our video description anyway.
Yes. So, but thank you for having us today on Key Culture Podcast. I'm Niilo Tarnanen, and I'm saying hello.
And I'm Matei Gheorghiu, and I'm saying goodbye.
And share and like and click and subscribe.
Click everything you find. We don't know what everything does, but it's good for your health. So
yes, please subscribe to the Key Culture Podcast, because as a YouTuber, I know how much effort goes into creating a video, and it's definitely more than you guys think. And if you've made it this far, then just click the like button, click the subscribe button. It really helps the algorithm so that more people hear about your conversations, which are really important conversations. Yeah.
Thank you, Alexey.
Thank you very much, guys, for having me.
And you can, of course, always subscribe and like his channel as well. That
yes,
Eastern European guy.
Can you put some links somewhere there? I don't know, wherever.
We'll do that.
So, have a nice weekend and farewell from the Key Culture Podcast.
Bye.
Bye.